my talk is titled Building Your Translation Process. It's not a very sexy title. It should have named it like something like Translation Machine Learning or something like that. Nevertheless, and why am I trying to give you this talk? It's basically a few years ago, I was running Happyr.com on only Swedish and English. And then I got a new client in Russia. I got a new client in Denmark. So I needed to do some proper translation. So I Googled how to do translation in Symfony or how to do translations in any modern application. And I found pretty much nothing. Didn't find a single blog post about it. I didn't find the case study. I found nothing. So I tried a lot of things and learned the hard way. And something I learned was this, that language is not the same as currency, and language is not the same as country. And when I accepted this or figured this out, then a lot of things became easier to me. So this is kind of the base of my talk. I want to tell you the answer of questions you didn't really have. I want you to kind of learn from my mistakes, and I'm going to show you what I was struggling with. And I will also tell you a process. How could you properly do translations? And if you know that you know translations pretty well, and if you're super duper confident with your translation processes and you have like 8 languages, this talk might not really be for you. But if you only do 1, 2, 3 languages and you want to know more about translations, then this will be excellent for you. Last time I did a talk, they told me I didn't present myself enough. They didn't. I just I was just starting with giving you my content. I didn't present myself. So this is me. I'm doing pretty much everything on Happyr.com. We are a website for fair recruitment. I do some podcasts. I'm a certified developer. I run the PHP meetups groups in Stockholm, and I do plenty of open source. My real open source journey started at SymfonyCon Paris 2 years ago when PSR 6 came out, and we do a lot of cache. And me and my friend like, hey, let's implement this. At the same time, we started to do HTTP plug, which is an abstraction over Guzzle and Bus. So with that comes a lot of API clients, and with that comes a lot of mail clients. And then I wrote like a boilerplate. This is how you properly do API clients. And I also maintain of both Guzzle and Bus. I'm writing my own PSR specification, PSR 7 specification, and I'm writing a new PSR of HTTP clients. And I do a lot of tests. One of my favorite packages is the NSA one. It totally violates all class privacy. So you basically can fetch private properties and methods with ease. I also do plenty of geocoding stuff. And this is the only things I'm created or maintain. I also contribute to a lot of libraries. But speaking about translations, when I needed some tooling, so I started to do my own Happyr-Translation-Bundle, and then I did something called Happyr Auto Fallback Translations, which I will talk about later. And I'm also maintaining the JMSTranslationBundle, and I did some contributions to the Xliff So what I want to say is I've worked a lot of translations. I've read a lot of issues people having with translations, and now it's time for me to show everybody else. I don't think we should do translations in secret anymore. So that's why I'm here and doing this talk. Seems fair. Thank you. So the translations component in Symfony. It's one of my favorite components. It's my top 5 components. Top 1 is naturally option resolver. It's my top 5 favorite because it's so simple. It has a lot of classes, does a lot of things, but has very few concepts. And if you didn't know, it basically works like this. There's one class called Translator, which you could add a lot of resources to, like translation files. And you add a lot of loaders to it. And then you ask for, hey, can you get me the translation for this key? And the translation class builds it reads all the resources with the loaders, and then it builds a hash map, pretty much, or they call it a message catalog. And it uses that hash map to return answers. And it's simple as this. And of course, it is all cached for performance and stuff. And also, the component contains extractor that looks at your source code, extracting translation and writing it back. And the loaders and dumpers, there are plenty of them. because we want to support different formats like YAML, xliff, CSV, PO, it's plenty. So this is like a quick overview how it works, how the translation component works. So let's get started. Say we build a small application, say we build a small MVP, and you may be tempted to do something like this. I would say never ever put translations directly in source in the Twigs files, because it will be a hassle to find those later when you want to do more than MVP. So even though you only do one language, please use translations. And since it's a small application, you just write it in YAML because it's simple and easy. You could argue, like, could I do my admin part of the application with no translations? I'm sure, if you're really sure that you don't ever gonna translate it, that's fine. And since you are like a hipster, you slap on JMSTranslationBundle because you want to have this nice UI where you can edit your translations. And also, you have these references, the source references, so if you click those, it would automatically open in your IDE. This is cool. This is what most people do. It works okay, not good, it works okay. And we can stop here if you like. We can be all happy with this. This is only okay because you will run into more issues when you're adding more users or more languages. While maintaining JMSTranslationBundle, we got a lot of issues like this. Most of them were related to the file references, saying like, we don't use them, can we remove them? Because people are running into issues when they're extracting things, when they extract new translations and they have moved source code around, all the translation files were updated and they have to deal with merge conflicts. So it was a pain for people, obviously, or they complained that it didn't work properly, or they would complain that we should not use relative path but absolute path and stuff. In fact, 80% of all the issues in JMSTranslationBundle was either related to the extractor or these source files. So what eventually came to me was that it's fundamentally wrong to store your translations files in Git, because it's not code, it's actually data you store there. And nobody should have any issues with your translation files. And some of you may argue like, hey, it's all JMSTranslationBundle that does things wrong. I mean, I could have them in Git. But I will say, sure, the bundle has flaws, but it will be more obvious than when it comes to when you're adding more languages to this. Say you have them in Git. Say you use your static files, and you add some new translations. You take that file, and what do? You send it to Translator, and then wait for a week for him or her to finish, and then you handle the merge conflict when the file comes back? Or do you try to teach your translators to use Git and make sure that they handle the merge conflict themselves? Or do you stop a new host with this JMSTranslationBundle installed so they can edit this translation on that new host with a nice UI? And it's actually more of the latter, but not in Git. But you shouldn't set up that host yourself. You should use a translation service to do this for you. So the truth of all your translations should be in a translation service, like a remote database. And this is just a handful I found, any of them will do. I really do like Loco, because it has a very nice API, and it's a kind of nice UI as well. I know people are using Transflex, and some using Crowdin. And this is how the interface of Loco looks. It's a simple UI and simple database. And this is where I send all my translators. They go in here and translate stuff. And at each deployment later, I just download my translations. So whenever I deploy, I get the latest from Loco. Make sense? Am I going too fast or going too slow? Perfect. In fact, I've never got another answer of that question. Everybody says perfect. So what about uploads? You can still use your web UI. However, it's important that they will eventually come to the translation source. I'll talk about this in a minute. I've seen, in my open source world, I've seen people really taking good care, they really care about this question. What file format shall I use my translations? And the truth is, I don't really care. I don't care at all. The truth is, you shouldn't care at all either, because your translations is now just a cache. The real data is in the cloud, and you download it to cache, and then use Symfony cache later. So it's just a secondary cache. So let's use xliff, because it's an industry standard. Okay, no more issues about translation sources. And if you feel like, hey, I'm having my translations in YAML already, just use a converter. I've created one, and this is really a nice converter because it does pretty much nothing but uses Symfony translation component, and it creates one reader and one writer, and then it just reads from one source and writes to the second source, and that's how you convert it. This is basically how it does. I gotta give you some quick, short answers about different topics now. Say URLs. How do you properly structure your URLs? Because a URL is a unique resource locator, which means that two different versions of your site, or two different versions of a page, should not have the same URL. And having two different languages is two different versions. So since most of my site is private, like you have to log in to access it, I choose a method like this. In my URI, I just add the locale. And there's plenty in Symfony docs telling you how to do this. So I won't go into it. The point is, Google really cares about this. My users really don't. So for my account page, I don't use this scheme at all. I just write the URLs as they are. You could argue, if most of your sites are public, you could say that, hey, let's use subdomains instead. The benefit of this is that you can have different versions running on different languages. The drawback might be that I'm not really sure how Google treats subdomains. But I mean, it's up to you to decide. I tend to have everything on one site, everything on one domain. And there's a nice bundle for this. It's I18N routing bundle. You may use it, and it helps you to create this route, and it helps you to, when you reference a route, you don't have to care about translations. I have one slide here. This is the only slide in all the presentation telling you this is something you have to do. This is no exceptions. You have to do this. And it's basically telling Google and other bots and spiders what this page or the other translation of this page, where they are. It's fairly simple with me using this strategy, but say if I was doing a blog, and say I had the blog title in this log, and somehow I also translated that blog post. So I could have different titles here. So I'm basically saying this is the Swedish site, Swedish version, and that's the English version, this is the French version. Make sense? Some nodding their head. Excellent, thank you. Say that a new user comes to my site. I've never seen this user before. How do I decide what language I should serve him or her? I'm using like 7 different strategies. I've created myself a locale resolver or whatever. And the first thing I do, I'm looking at the query parameters, saying if I find the HL in query parameter, that I'm using that locale. And then I'm looking at the session. And then I start looking at the cookie, and I go on to the user sessions, and then I'm gonna check from what country is this IP the user connects with. And at last, I do the accept headers from the browser. And if I don't find anything, I just go with a random locale or just go to English. Something I didn't expect it to be an issue was the design. Your design actually is affected by your language. It came as a surprise to me, but I translated my site to Russian, which has very, very long words. Same with Finnish. Like if you have a nice little button saying save user, that button is not nice and little anymore if you're doing it Finnish. It's a very, very wide button. And things to be aware about. How does your 200 pixel wide sidebar look like when all the items get longer? Or your top bar navigation. How will that behave if all the elements will be 1 centimeter longer? Will it split into 2 rows? If you're not a pro designer, or if you're a pro designer, that might not be an issue. But if you're like me, that thinks CSS is fun, you will have issues. I had plenty of issues with this. And speaking of languages, or different languages in design, I spoke to a really great UX designer, and she told me, I can't do this. You shouldn't have flags in your language switcher. I thought it was great because you have both the words and you have and you have graphics, and it must be great. But then she gave me one counterexample saying, hey, what flag do you use for Arabic? And that's why you shouldn't use it. And I stood there speechless. So don't use flags because it doesn't make sense in all languages. And also, the language selector, this is just links adding the HL query parameter at the end. Takes the current URL and add HL query parameter at the end. That's how I change languages. And speaking of Arabic, how do you handle RTL? If you read it backwards, how would you solve that? That will definitely screw up your design. I did something like this. I would like to be quick and easy, so I did something. I just listened on the kernel response event, and then I check if it's a master request. Then I see is an RTL language, and then I just insert some CSS. If you like, you can insert some CSS. You can insert a reference to a CSS file there. But I was happy with this. Also, I would admit, I did this pretty quick. Years ago, I did this pretty quick. I did it you can see that I have the variable name toolbar because I stole this piece of code from the web profile toolbar. It's the same as they were using. Another question that, for some reasons, is really relevant for a lot of users. They ask this a lot. How do I do translations in JavaScript? And there are 3 good ways. No, there are 2 good ways and 1 not so good way. The first way that I like is just adding your translations at your DOM. You use as attributes. Say you have a button and that button says show. And if you click it, it should say hide. So with JavaScript, you could make it work if you're just using these labels. That's an easy way. Some would recommend the William Durand JMSTranslationBundle. This is the thing I don't like. I see it's a Symfony recipe for this as well, but I don't really. The way I see it, the only thing that bundle does is doing this, but for all your translations. So I don't feel comfortable exposing all my translations in JavaScript, only the one I need in JavaScript. So I recommend you doing this instead. Just create a JavaScript twig file and print out your translation there in in an object. Fine, are you happy with JavaScript now? I get less and less confirmation from you, but I guess I gotta go on anyway. So I've told you a lot of technical or kind of technical tips and tricks now, things that you might not be aware of. So how about the process? How do you actually work with translations? I mean, the things I told you now, you set it up once and then you don't care about it anymore. But how about the process? We're starting with adding new translations. And this is what I do every day. And there is no really right answer to this question. I won't say this is what you should do. I'll give you like 5 or 6 options now. The important thing is that they will end up in your cloud, in your translation service eventually. So what you could do is it could be easy. You can just go directly to your translation source. I mean, this directly in local and add your translations there. Add your translations there. This is not as cool or sexy. What is cooler is extracting translations from source. Basically looks at your source code, finding all the keys, and then add it to your translation files. This works for most translations, naturally not all, because it's really, really hard to do static analysis on your source code and find dynamic translations. So it only fetches the simple ones, but most of your translations are simple ones. xliff does this, Symfony translation component does this, JMS does this, and PHP-Translation does this. So this is very common, and they work not equally good. Some are better than others, naturally. Except for extracting, you could have a nice UI, like this is the PHP translation UI, because it allows you to actually have a add button. It's a little bit cooler. My favorite, though, is a Symfony profile integration, which basically, when I go to a page and I see in the toolbar 2 translations are missing, I click there, I get to the profile page, and I can add or edit translations, and it would automatically send to the cloud. I found this process pretty helpful. Or if you're way more hipster, you could use your edit in place translation. So what you basically do, you click a button to activate it, and then you edit your translations in your design. Damon Alexander provided this, and he's more hipster than I am, so this is pretty cool. This was like 5 or 6 ways to edit your translations. No, to add translations. So how about edit translations? If you're working with a team, you're probably working with pull requests and feature branches. So say you create a feature branch, you add a lot of translations, or you change a lot of translations, and in the meantime, your coworker published master. He puts master to production. Then you will have the new translations with the old code, which is naturally not preferred. So what I enforced, I say, never ever change translations. You can only change translations if it's a typo or a grammar thing, but you should never change the meaning or the context of the translations. As an alternative to this, there is you could have only your English, your keys and your English translation in the source, and then you branch out, and then when you merge it back in, you have your CI engine pushes the translations to the cloud. That works pretty well for some developers. It's a lot of more hassle to set up, but that's an option. Did you understand? I don't have a proper slide for this. Okay, good. A benefit of deciding never ever change translations is if this is your translation table, and if in English you decide, hey, let's change it to something else, let's change start to read more, then you have to remember to change all the other translations, which might be a hassle, especially if you do something like, hey, read more to the right, or click the button below, and if you change that in English, then it doesn't make sense in any other languages. So I enforce never change translations. So you say that you added new translations. You had to do a hotfix. So you add a new button, and that button said something new. So you add a new translation, and you have like 7 languages. How do you put this hotfix in production? What I see it, you can have 3 methods. You could either wait for all translators to translate that button, and then they push it. And I mean, you have to call 8 translators and ask them to translate 2 words, and that won't cost you $1. They will probably charge you half an hour for that. Or if you're happy with showing all your Russian users, if you're happy with showing them a button in English, you could just use your fallback locale. Or you can use Google Translate. It's actually not as a bad idea as you would think. Because Google is horrible translating texts. I mean, it's the best we got, but it's horrible. You see that it's Google translated. But for menu elements, or for buttons, or short texts, especially websites texts, it's actually decent. It's not good, it's decent. And I am very fine with my Russian users has a decent translator for 1, 2, 3 weeks until the translator's caught up. It's way better than not showing that button at all, and it's way better than showing an English button. So that's how I do it. You may use A or B as well, but also depends. My users are very nice to me. They don't really care if it's a bug here or there, or they don't really care if it's a typo. But if you were working with a proper project or proper customers, they might care more. And so it all depends on your product, naturally. That's why I'm saying this is some options, do whatever you feel the best. So what about if you got a call from Thailand, you have a new customer, you have to translate all to Thai. Should you translate all your application? Because you know that all your translations are not used equally much. Some translations are used more, some are used less, right? And you know, you kind of had a feeling that if you translate like half of your application, then you will cover like 80% of your site. So you should kind of log this or track this, what is used the most. And I do it with a listener. I listen on kernel terminate. And then on kernel terminate, I ask the translator, hey, give me all the keys you were using in this request. I sort them a little bit, and then add some metadata. And then I use this and send it to a translation server, or send it to somewhere where I crunch the data. And with this, I can like draw conclusions saying that these are the translation strings that is used for my page or my dashboard. And these are the ones used for feature X. So if that new Thai customer only wants feature Z and Y, I don't have to translate feature X. Make sense? And I only can translate the common things in the applications. Because I know that you have a great set of features that pretty much never ever used by anyone. And it's no point in translating them for a new country. Not at once, not until you see that that new country is beneficial. So this is how you prioritize your keys. And of course, this server who's crunching the numbers, it sends the result to Loco. It sends it using labels or tag to tag things up in Loco or in your other translation service. Most good ones support it. I should also mention context. I think it's important to have this table somewhere in your application or somewhere in your team. The contents doesn't really matter, but I've said that for form labels, just prefix the translation key with label. Do the same with flash, error, and help messages. And I suffix paragraphs and headings to make it more obvious what a translator actually translating. And then if your translations start with a lowercase character, let's start with an underscore. So I'm saying you should define something like this. Content is not important, but you should have it written down. Another thing to be aware of is reuse. So you probably pay your translators by hour or per word. So you tend to think, hey, if I reuse my translations, I pay them less, right? It's a valid thought, but don't do it. If you're translating through easy languages, then it may work. But say Russians, they have two forms of plural. We say one apple, two apples in English. In Russian, if there's less than 5 apples, they say something. If it's more than 5 apples, they say something else. So they have two types of plural forms. And these are the things that you're not aware of because you don't know Russian, and it makes sense. Also, I think this is in Russian. If I have a heading called users, that's one word. But if I have it in a link, that somehow implies an action, right? And we click the link to get the users. And that's a different word in Russian. I think it's in Russian. But point is, you don't know all the languages, so don't reuse keys. I'm going to continue with this because I like languages. There is something called Clusivity, which means English doesn't have this. But the point is, if I'm standing here with my friend and you come up here, I can say, hey, we won the lottery. Does that mean that we all won the lottery? Or does it mean me and my friend, not you, won the lottery? There's no way to distinguish between those two we's in English and most European languages. But in non-European languages, they have two different we. A more obscure example would be direction. In some native Australian languages, they don't have directions. They don't have words for left, right, or backward and forward. Or I did it way wrong, but they don't have those words. They use north, south, east, and west instead. So at each point on their day, they know exactly what direction is north. Because if they don't, they can't really speak properly. And this famous example, Eskimos, 50 words of snow, that's a lie, but point is, don't reuse keys. In Swedish, we have the same word val that could mean both election, choice, and whale. So if if I have a Wikipedia and I say election, I shouldn't write val as my key, because and then reuse that on the whale page of Wikipedia. Doesn't make sense. Again, don't reuse keys. I think this is super duper important. But sometimes you should reuse keys. Point is, I want to show you, should you do a lot of work now, not reusing keys, and have it simpler later? Or should you have a headache when you're translating your site to Chinese, because then you have to update your English translations because you reused a lot of keys? I point this up with most of my talk. I'm saying, like, please be aware of this, and then you decide what to do. You can completely decide to ignore my don't reuse keys warnings, but you know that you could get a headache later. Just telling, be aware of this. With these translation processes, obviously the translation components is not enough. It's great with translating stuff in a Symfony application, but it doesn't support your process. So you could write a lot of scripts or write bundles yourself, or you could use something pre-written for you and like adapt them. And there's 3 major ones. Yeah, I worked with them all. I like one more than the other because it has a lot of features and a lot of stuff, and it's a little bit bigger. And truth is, I mean, I guess you all know JMSTranslationBundle. Most of you do. I guess you noticed in early 2016, we got rid of all the issues, or most of the issues and pull requests. We resolved them, we closed them, we merged them, and it was 3 of us who were doing this great work. We promised the maintainer to maintain it for 6 months. And after those 6 months expired, I called the maintainer again and said, hey, we've done our 6 months, it has been great, but we want to further develop the bundle, not only maintain it. So I came up with a plan. I wanted to do this, this, and that, but I don't want to take away credit from you, but here's what we plan to do. And we couldn't come to an agreement. I guess he didn't like it, or yeah. So what I did over a year ago, I created PHP translations. And at the hack day at the last SymfonyCon, we were a group of people, and we just added a lot of feature to it. And so it's really great, and it's since midsummer this year, it's actually way better than JMS translations. It's extracting more and adds more features and stuff. Most of the things I showed you was from this organization. Also, I want to say, the owner of JMS Translation, he's not a jerk at all. I have great respect for his work and his opinion and what he's done, and he's quite a nice guy. We just couldn't agree. So if you see him, you give him a high five or something, or a hug, I mean, you decide. Tools are great. What I showed you is nice, but PHP developers tend to, like, no, I don't want to add more dependencies in my composer JSON. I don't know why that's an issue, but I get that people don't like it. And the fun thing is, the PHP developers in general, they don't care about how large these dependencies are. They just are allergic to the number of them. So adding like a large library called Gustle with 5,000 or 6,000 lines of code, that's fine because there's just one. But adding 5 small packages, that's an issue. Not sure why. I'll talk more about HP plug later. I have a Lightning talk about that. But you all should read Principle of Package Design by Matthias Novak. It's a great book. He talks about solid on a class level and then take this concept up on a package level. It's a good read. Anyhow, you don't want to add more things to Composer JSON. So there is a CLI for you. What I did is I took a full stack Symfony application. I threw in all translation stuff I could find, and I made a FAR of that. And I rewrote all the namespaces because I shouldn't have any conflicts. And you can use that FAR just as you would use the PHP-Translation Just do it and extract things. It's in beta. There's still some issues. But I mean, whenever I got some time or whenever I got some help, this will be a perfect solution for you that doesn't really like dependencies in composition. Do I have room for one question? Nope. Then I guess I thank you. Please rate my talk and give me feedback. I mean, I would like to improve somehow. So if you like it, give it 5 stars up, or if you didn't like it, it seems to work to give 1 star as well. So please go to join in and find something. Thank you.